The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous two-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Amateur Traveler, episode 890. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about pineapple plantations and night markets, whitewater rafting and volcanoes, stingless jellyfish and giant clams, surfing and sea caves as we go to the island of Mindanao in the Philippines. This is Chris Christensen from Amateur Traveler. Let's talk about Mindanao. I'd like to welcome to the show Michael Grosberg from LikeLocal.io, which is a cultural immersion travel company, and we'll talk more about that later. But Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
And Michael has come to talk to us about a lesser traveled region of the Philippines, Mindanao. Now, Michael, what's your connection with Mindanao?
I first traveled there probably 17, 18 years ago. I write for Lonely Planet travel guidebooks, and the Philippines was actually my first Lonely Planet job. I think it was my second Lonely Planet job in the Philippines when I traveled to Mindanao. So I've been going there every 3 years or so for the past, I think, 17 or 18 years.
Wow. Okay.
Usually when I'm there, I spend about a month all over the island. I've also been there for another magazine assignment back when Mindanao was, I'd say, even lesser traveled. And the idea of a foreign traveler taking a bus through the eastern heart of it seemed a little off the beaten path, risky almost. And so I did that. And it was, of course, a very peaceful, wonderful trip. And I wrote about it. And so I was there again most recently for Lonely Planet this past October, November.
Excellent. And to put it on a map, we're in the southernmost region of the Philippines.
It's the southernmost island. It's the second largest island after Luzon. And Luzon is the island that Manila is on. And Mindanao is also interesting because if you go to the very far western tip of Mindanao and you're in the city of Zamboanga or Zamboanga City, from there, an enormous archipelago of probably hundreds of islands goes almost all the way to the coast of Malaysian Borneo. So there are a couple large islands in the Sulu archipelago, and the furthest west in the Sulu Islands is, I think, the island of Sitangakai. I haven't made it there. Few travelers do. But from there, I think you can actually see Borneo from the island.
Okay, interesting. The first question obviously is, why should someone go to Mindanao?
Most people that go to Mindanao these days go directly to the island of Siargao, which is one of the hottest, most happening places in all the Philippines for people to travel to. And we'll get to that. And it's deservedly popular. However, there's so much more to see in Mindanao. Mindanao has one of the largest cities in the Philippines, the city of Davao. Davao is in the far south of Mindanao. It's got a cosmopolitan culture, amazing, wonderful food. The mountains and the islands around Davao are incredible. You can spend a month there. The highest peak in the Philippines, Mount Apo, which you can climb, and people do, is only a couple hours or so from Davao. There are endless coastlines to explore. There's indigenous culture. There are surfing spots. The city of Zamboanga, which I mentioned previously, also has its own unique culture, a combination of Muslim influence, Malaysian, Spanish cuisine. It's got a little bit of a frizzen of excitement, if you will, because when Mindanao was more unstable, the dateline for reporters writing about the violence in Mindanao usually was from Zamboanga City. The whole coastline, the north, the east, really all over, are dotted with incredible beaches, and a lot of them are not really traveled to by foreigners, but Filipinos love to travel. And so Filipinos that live in Mindanao go to all these places.
Excellent. One question for you before we get too far in. You've mentioned when it was less safe. And in my mind, the days that Mindanao was on a travel advisory, and I don't know what status today, were around the time you started going.
Yeah. So there are periodic upticks of violence every few years, even. I would say that right now, the level of threat from anything happening is probably as low as it's been maybe in the last 20 years. And let me just add the caveat that the places that we're primarily going to be talking about, including Camiguin Island, Cagayan de Oro, and Siargao, haven't experienced violence of any note for a very long time.
Okay.
They would be as safe. They're not on any travel advisory list. However, if you go on to the US, the British, the Australian, probably they have hyperbolic warnings that all of Mindanao is considered unsafe and not recommended to travel. When I was there in 2017, I happened to be there when martial law was declared.
Okay.
And there was a city in the heart of Mindanao called Marawi City. And Marawi City is in the part of Mindanao that's called the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao. And people generally do not travel there. There was a leader of a militant organization that the Philippine military went to arrest, and he and his group resisted, and there were several months of intense fighting, and the entire city of Marawi was devastated. To this day, it's a ghost town, and there's tens of thousands of civilians that haven't yet returned to their homes. And so, even when I was there in 2017 during martial law, for the average person traveling in Mindanao, especially in northern Mindanao, the only issue, if you will, was there were periodic army checkpoints that would get on the bus to check your identification. Other than that, tourism was happening. It was business as usual.
Hmm. Interesting. Excellent. Let's get into your itinerary. What itinerary are you going to recommend for us?
That's a tough one. And
I know the 1 week thing that I put on our guests is challenging for you. I understand that.
yeah, so that's a tough one. And I'm trying to limit it to what most people do, with the
Yeah.
understanding that most people do it because there's a reason for that. And again, I will add the caveat that the two most popular islands of Siargao, which is easily the most popular, most people fly in there directly, fly out directly, and easily spend a week or more there. And we're going to get to Siargao. The other island that's the second most popular island is Camiguin. Again, another place that is easy to spend an entire week as well. But I wanted to add a little bit of an urban experience in Mindanao. So, with that in mind, I thought about recommending people flying from Manila to the northern Mindanao city of Cagayan de Oro.
Okay.
And Cagayan de Oro is not an attractive city. There's few Philippine cities that actually I would consider in and of themselves physically attractive. But Cagayan de Oro is a university city, so there's lots of young people, a lot of life on the streets, if you will. And it's also the gateway to other parts of rural areas to the south of Cagayan de Oro that are worth visiting.
Okay.
So there are at least half a dozen or more direct flights a day from Manila to Cagayan de Oro on several airlines, including Cebu Pacific Airline and Philippines Airline. I like to fly on Cebu Pacific for a few reasons. One, it tends to be the cheapest, and Cebu Pacific has a very Filipino quality to them. Usually, halfway through, the flight attendants begin a quiz for the passengers, and the
Okay.
passengers get rewards for answering questions like who has a pen in their pocket, and the quickest person to pull out a pen gets a Cebu Pacific change purse. There's something about that warmth or that hospitality that's particularly Filipino that Cebu Pacific has.
Okay.
The Caganeta Airport is about 35 kilometers west of the city. And the airport's name, and it was moved in the, I don't know, the last 5 to 7 years. So the name of the airport is the Lagui Dingan Airport, about 32 kilometers west of Cagayan de Oro. When you arrive there, rather than getting your own taxi, there's plenty of shuttle van services that leave when full. They're affordable, only 200 pesos. I need to work that out in my head. That's about $8 or so, I think.
Okay.
And they will take you directly to whatever hotel you are staying at in the city.
I'm seeing today that's about $4.
Oh, is it $4? 200 rand. I'm 200 pesos. Oh, okay. That's good to know. So, unfortunately, there aren't great options for interesting, unique, really comfortable place to stay in Cagayan de Oro. There's a few higher end, large, very nice hotels, not too much character. They're convenient because they're attached to several big malls right in the center of Cagayan de Oro. In the Philippines, especially in Cagayan de Oro, a lot of the restaurants, the good ones even, are in the malls. So if you arrive late at night, like I did on my last trip, you can check into your hotel and then eat next door. So that's why those two hotels, I'd say it's called the Seda Centro and Lim Ketkai Lux Hotel. If you want a little bit of a more budget option, the New Dawn Pension Plus Hotel, you're not going to get much character. It's a large, I don't know how many stories now. They've added a few other stories recently. Comfortable enough, centrally located. So those are a couple options worth considering. The reason to spend any time in Cagayan de Oro, in large part, is because they have an exceptionally interesting night market, and it's called the Kogon Public Night Market. Ask anybody in town, any taxi driver, and they'll be able to take you there. You can get every kind of exotic Filipino food, chicken intestines. You can get balut, which is raw fetus of an egg. You can get Korean style corn dogs and fried chicken, tacos, donuts, kinilaw, which is the Philippine version of ceviche,
Okay.
roasted pig. And Cagayan de Oro is known, at least if you ask a city resident, for having the best lechon baboy, which is roasted pig in all of Mindanao. The night market sprawls, and if you leave the confines of the food part of the night market, then it's a meat market, a fruit and vegetable market, a clothing, home goods. Basically, you can find anything that you can ever want. It's very festive, it's lit up, it's safe. So it's really an experience worth planning your trip to Cagayan de Oro around.
Got it. I love a good night market. So
Yeah.
you're speaking my language here.
One of the other reasons to visit is the outdoors to the south of Cagayan de Oro. So there's mountains that rise above Cagayan de Oro, and the province is called Malay Balay. The province is Bukidnon province, and there's canyons, there's huge plantations of banana, carrot, pineapples, and sugarcane. There's indigenous groups that call this area their home. You can trek to the tops of several mountains. The fourth highest peak in the country is there. That's Mount Kiniglad. And Cagayan de Oro has a really active community of outdoor climbers and trekkers. But it's the easiest thing, and what I've done and what I would recommend to do is to go whitewater rafting. There's several companies that run this trip. They pick you up wherever you're staying in Cagayan de Oro. They drive you south for about, I don't know, 30 to 40 minutes, and you're rafting the Cagayan de Oro River, which has class 2 to 3 rapids, some class 4, depending on the time of the year and how long you want to raft for. It's a lot of fun. Generally, there's not too many foreigners that are going to be in Cagayan de Oro, so you're probably going to share your boat with Filipinos that are traveling from Manila.
Okay.
And people from Manila love to go to Cagayan de Oro because they love to get out of the city and to see trees and mountains and to go rafting.
And then we're rafting on the Cagayan de Oro on the River of Gold, the river that the town is named after.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And you float past bucolic countryside. The guides tend to be very colorful, crack a lot of jokes. There is lunch at the end of the trip, usually. And most of the people that are coming from Manila, it's their first time rafting. So even if you're an experienced person yourself, it's fun to see how joyful people that are doing this for the first time are and what a kick they get from this. But it can get rough. And I've fallen out once before, not on my most recent trip. So it's not so calm. It should provide a little bit of thrills. And it's one of the easiest places to do it. Mindanao also has other great spots for rafting, including in Davao, which I mentioned previously, which is the largest city in Mindanao. And they also have great rafting with class 2, 3, some 4 as well. It's easier to do in Cagayan de Oro. It's a
Okay.
shorter trip from the city to the river.
Got it.
If you have time, you can rent a car and visit the Del Monte pineapple plantation. It's one of the largest fruit plantations in Mindanao, maybe in all the Philippines. If you like pineapples, you can just pick one off the side of the road when you're driving through, have a taste. It's also known for the area where the Del Monte plantation is called Camp Phillips. And Camp Phillips is where MacArthur fled after the Battle of Corregidor in 1942. So there's a sort of historical interest there. The Del Monte plantation also has a golf course, a country club with a restaurant. The food isn't spectacular, but there's a gift shop where you can buy Del Monte branded products, including pineapples if you want. At the Circle intersection by Camp Phillips, there's a massive sculpture of a pineapple. So if you have an interest in pineapple and fruit, it's worth driving there, but also just for the scenery.
Okay. And when you say driving there, you're thinking we would rent a car and renting a car and driving yourself is a great option, or are we doing a collective taxi, or how are we getting down there?
I've rented a car and driven there. Driving in the city, if you're not used to it, can be a little bit hectic.
I would think.
There's tricycles, lots of motorbikes, of course, trucks,
Right.
lots of cars, maybe even some animals that might share the road when you get out into the rural area. So I'm comfortable doing it. However, I would understand if somebody is not. You can share a taxi. That's certainly one way to do it. I'd say if you're on your own, it might be a little bit pricey. If you're in a group of 3 to 4, it would be affordable. There are some guides that can take you there. However, most people that are coming, that are doing that, are renting a car.
Okay.
Those are the highlights, the realistic highlights of Cagayan de Oro. After a night or two, it depends on what time I think you arrive in Cagayan de Oro. If you're going to go rafting, explore the countryside to the south of the city, and you only have a week or a little more than a week, then I would advise moving on to Camiguin, which is the next stop. To get to Camiguin from mainland Mindanao can be a little bit complicated. So, plenty of people will decide to fly in directly to Camiguin. And Camiguin is a small island that's off the coast of northern Mindanao. It's a beautiful island. The profile looks like Hawaii. It has a massive volcano called Mount Hiba Hiba. It has, I think, dozens of other volcanic cones as well. But so it's unusual. A lot of the Philippine islands are not mountainous, they're flatter. So Camiguin is a little bit unusual. So to get to Camiguin, though, from the Philippine mainland, you have to take a bus from Cagayan de Oro to a small port called Balanguan. And the bus from Cagayan de Oro to Balanguan is about 2.5 hours or so.
Okay.
Depends how many times the bus is going to stop. It's easy to get the bus in Cagayan de Oro. They leave probably every 20 minutes or so. All you need to do is turn up at the Agora bus terminal, which is the main bus terminal in the city. Tell them where you're going and they'll point you in the right direction. Usually you can choose from an aircon bus to an ordinary bus, and ordinary means non-aircon.
Okay.
Sometimes if they leave the windows open on those buses, those can be more pleasant than the aircon buses where the aircon might be turned up full blast and it can get very cold. And these are the kind of buses that I have a lot of affection for because they'll often be showing B action films on the TV, Jean-Claude Van Damme or Steven Seagal movies. And when I was young and I traveled and backpacked through all of Asia, those are the kind of films that I watched then. And so I enjoy, even if you can't hear the volume, I enjoy them now to this day.
Ah bon chien. Bonjour, je suis Theo, a tour leader with Explore, and this is Punti. He's helping us find truffles under the trees next to this beautiful vineyard. Maybe for tomorrow's cooking class? Oui, col... c'est mis en heure. Parfait. C'est mis o'clock. Not everyone gets to enjoy a Bordeaux sunset this way, but you will if you explore. No, Punti. Search exploreworldwide.com and don't just travel. Explore.
The last thing you want to hear when you need your auto insurance most is a robot with countless irrelevant menu options. Which is why with USAA Auto Insurance, you'll get great service that is easy and reliable, all at the touch of a button. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
You get the bus to Balanguan, and Balanguan is a tiny little port. There's nothing there really other than food stalls, the bus stop, and the port where you get the boat to Camiguin. The ferries that leave from Balanguan go to the port of Benoni on the island of Camiguin. They leave fairly frequently, so the longest you're going to probably wait is an hour or so. There's more departures in the morning rather than the afternoon, so I'd recommend getting there in the morning. As you get closer to the island and the island comes into focus, it's a pretty exciting view. Dramatic profile of the island, like I mentioned, this huge volcanic cone. It's lushly green, mountainous, beautiful water. When you pull up into Benoni, there's going to be every form of transportation that's going to offer to take you to your accommodation. There's tricycles. The cheapest way to get around is to join in a group tricycle, and they'll take you to the capital, the largest town on Camiguin called Mambahao. If you arrange with your accommodation in advance, they can pick you up there. I'd recommend there's about 3 places on Camiguin that I think are far and above the nicest places. 2 of them are run by the same people, the same company, and they're called Bintana sa Preso. There's a Bintana sa Preso in the mountains of Camiguin. They have fantastic views of Mambahao below, of beaches, of the islands in the distance, really dramatic. There are plunge pools. There's even these little interesting, like wicker nests that they built right on the edge of the property that they can set up a romantic dinner if you're there with a partner or anybody that you want to have a romantic dinner with. It's a pretty special place to do that. The Bintana sa Preso that's located on the coast of Camiguin also has these tiny little plunge pools that are situated right on the top of a cliff and fantastic sunset views. The other place that I recommend, and it's a little bit of a step up in terms of price and luxury, is a place called Balai sa Balai. And that's designed like a Balinese style villa, mahogany, all polished wood. They have an amazing bar that's built right on the beach. It's a full service dive shop too. So if you want to go diving in Camiguin, that's the place to stay. But all three of those places are fantastic. And one of the things to keep in mind when you go to Camiguin, Camiguin is not white sand beaches, it's brown sand beaches.
Okay.
So it's maybe not going to meet your expectation of this picture postcard kind of beach. There's other reasons to go there. The thing that I recommend doing, and really on any Philippine island, is renting a motorbike. If you're not comfortable, I would try to prepare to get comfortable because it really allows you so much more freedom and flexibility in exploring an island like Camiguin.
Okay.
So the road around the island is total of 64 kilometers long, and you can do the whole circuit in a day, and it's an amazing way of seeing the day. There's lots of stops along the way. There's natural springs that are both cold and hot. There's waterfalls. There's fantastic views. I would recommend doing a half island motorbike tour so that you have time to enjoy the spots. So, one of the first places that I would stop that's to the west of Mambahao is called the Stations of the Cross. And if you walk up these steps, up this hillside, there's some of the most beautiful views of the island. And below, you can see what was called the Sunken Cemetery. And this was an actual cemetery that slipped into the sea following an earthquake of 1871. So there's a cross that marks that spot. It's also a prime place to go snorkeling and scuba diving. There is the Karibawasan Falls, which is a beautiful stream of water that drops 70 meters to a plunge pool. You can swim, you can picnic there. Another falls called the Tuasan Falls. When I started going to Camiguin, like I said, 17, 18 years ago, it was really difficult to get to these falls. You had to ride your motorbike, the road ended, then you had to hike. I don't remember how many kilometers, but it was a rough hike. Now they've built a road that cut through the entire heart of the center of Camiguin. And there's a road, the main Cross Island Road now goes right to the Tuasan Falls. So you can drive up there, park your motorbike, walk to the falls. They're beautiful as well. I'm not sure whether you can swim there. I think it depends on how much water is coming down from the falls.
Okay.
Another thing that is worth doing that most people do is to visit this pure white sandbar that's off the coast. It's called White Island. And there's nothing on there. There's no shade, there's no trees. It's really just a sandbar a few hundred meters offshore. And the shape of the island is constantly evolving and changing depending on the tide and erosion, even the occasional sand theft from property owners on the mainland or on Camiguin that want to get some of this white sand. It's very popular with Instagrammers, people flying drones over the island. I wouldn't recommend going there other than early morning or the very last window in the day, which is around 4 p.m. Because there's no shade, you're generally going to be overheated and hot. So the earlier you go, the better. There's lots of boats that do this standard trip. It's 500 pesos up to 4 people. They run you out to the island. They leave. You have to tell them when they should return to pick you up because they're not going to dock and wait there themselves. They're going to go back to the mainland. You can walk around this sandbar. There's some really good snorkeling there. You can lie out for a bit. I'd bring water. But after a while, I can't make it there too much more than I'd say an hour before I want to go back. One other thing, if you can time your trip to Camiguin to the end of October, is when they hold the Lanzones Festival. This last trip, when I was there, I happened to arrive the day after the Lanzones Festival, so I missed it. But Lanzones is a small yellow fruit that tastes like a mix of lemons and lychees. And the Camiguin version of the Lanzone is relatively sweet compared to Lanzones that are grown elsewhere in the Philippines. But that's the iconic fruit. That's what Camiguin is known for. And their Lanzones festival is a full-on blowout. The Philippines is known for its cultural festivals, and they have pageants and music and barbecued food and parades. and it's several days when people from the mainland will make a point of visiting Camiguin. However, you need to really plan your accommodation in advance because everything fills up really quickly during that time.
Right. Sure. Interesting. Now, the other thing that caught my attention on Kamagin, because I've never seen it elsewhere, is a giant clam sanctuary.
Yeah, that clam sanctuary, I've been there and I've snorkeled there. However, when I was there last, it was closed because of a property dispute between the private owners of that property and the government. I spoke to a few people about it because I wanted to check it out again, and I'm unclear whether it was a question of the private property owners wanted to charge more or whether the government wanted a cut of that charge. It is unclear to me.
Okay.
You can find some of those giant clams elsewhere snorkeling. So you can snorkel. I mentioned before snorkeling by the Stations of the Cross, a popular spot. So you can find some giant clams there. The most popular spot to snorkel is another offshore island called Montigui Island. It's also a popular spot for scuba diving, and I've been diving there. But you can find some giant clams, just not in the concentration where you could have found them in the clam sanctuary.
Got it. Okay.
If you are really adventurous, if you like climbing, if you don't mind getting up very early in the morning, you can try climbing Mount Hibak, which is the volcano that I mentioned. And the peak is 1,320 meters. I mentioned it last erupted in 1951 when nearly 600 people were killed as a result of the eruption. If you decide not to climb it, and there's plenty of guides that will take you, like I said, you have to get up very early in the morning. It's a slog. You don't have many views on the way up. When you're at the peak, you can see Bohol, Cebu, Negros. These are islands that are really far distance to the north of Camiguin on a clear day. If you want to learn a little bit about volcanology and seismology without climbing to the top of this volcano, there is a station that monitors the volcano's activity off the road that cuts through the heart of the island, like I mentioned before. And there's some kind of old school dated photographs about the eruption of seismology instruments. You can ask some questions. The person there, depending on their mood, I think, is either going to be more forthcoming or not. It's worth stopping at when you're doing a cross island motorbike tour.
Okay.
From Camiguin, we want to get to Siargao, and Siargao is known as the gem of Mindanao. It really is to the point where it might be overexposed. However, it's still a wonderful place to visit. Getting there from the mainland and getting there from Camiguin is complicated. And this time around, I kept thinking I would be able to figure out an easy way. I was checking all the flight schedules. I thought, okay, I could fly from Camiguin to Cebu and then get a flight from Cebu to Siargao. But the schedules never line up. I would have had to spend a night in Cebu and then get up at 4 a.m. to get the flight to Siargao, which for some reason was the only time they have flights from Cebu. I did what I've done in the past, which is have to take the ferry back from Camiguin to the mainland of Mindanao to Balanguan. From Balanguan, you wait for a passing bus that will take you to the city of Butuan. This time around, I probably waited a frustrating hour, I think. I'm just waiting by the side of the road with my bag. It's very hot out, waiting for the bus to stop. And then beggars can't be choosers, so you're probably going to take the first one that comes by. And the first one that came by for me was non-aircon. I was a little bit uncomfortable. It was hot. When you get to Butuan, Butuan is a bit of an unpleasant city. It's very crowded. I try to grab the next bus going further east from Butuan. This time around, I got off to use the bathroom. I had already put my bags on the onward bus to go further east. And right as I got out of the bathroom, I saw the bus had already started moving on. I had to dash to catch the bus just as it was leaving the bus station. My one tip, even though I had told the bus driver I'm going to the bathroom, my tip would be either don't go to the bathroom or really insist that the bus driver not leave before he takes off. If for some reason you get to Butuan late, maybe the weather's not good, buses aren't going for some reason, buses usually do go, so there's not a lot of reason to spend the night, although I've done it before. But if you do, there is one historical thing to note about Butuan. So in a barangay outside the city, and a barangay is essentially the smallest kind of political community unit in the Philippines, there's a Balangay Shrine Museum, and that's where you can find the remains of a balangay. And a balangay is a seagoing outrigger boat. These are essentially the kind of boats that are still used, but these days with motors. And this balangay dated all the way from the year 321. So it makes it one of the oldest known artifacts in all of the Philippines.
Huh.
And nearby, unearthed only a few meters nearby, there were several coffins dating back to the 13th and 14th centuries. So you can take a tricycle from the bus station out there. It won't take you long. So if you have time, maybe that's worth a stop. Otherwise, just grab the next bus that takes you further east.
Okay.
So from Butuan, the bus that you're trying to get to is to the city of Siargao City.
Okay.
So this time around on my trip, I thought I was planning it that I could make it all the way from Camiguin to Siargao in a day. And I was very anxious about not wanting to have to spend a night in Siargao City. But the bus that I was on stopped literally every 10 minutes or so to pick someone else up or to drop somebody else off. Some of the buses are more express oriented than the
Sure.
bus I was on. I thought the bus that I was on was a so called direct. It was advertised as a direct, but it just kept stopping. And so as we got closer to Siargao City, and I knew that the last ferry from Siargao City to Siargao was leaving around 3:30, I was just getting more and more anxious about being able to catch that. Then at some point, I knew I wasn't going to be able to make it, and I had to reconcile myself to spending the night in Surigao City. A lot of people do this, though, because some of the people that are going to Siargao are coming by ferry from elsewhere in the Philippines. So not everyone flies direct to Siargao, even
Right.
though that's probably the nicest and the most convenient way to travel. The one place that I would recommend staying is a place called the Hotel Tavern. It's right on the paved boardwalk or the Malecon, if you will, of Surigao City.
Okay.
It's a little bit overpriced for what it is, but it's more than comfortable. If you get a room with a window out to the water, that's nice. Or one of the things to do that's worthwhile for the night is if you step outside your room at the Hotel Tavern, the waterfront there is lined with restaurants, and it's called the Surigao City Boulevard. And at nighttime, it also turns into a night market, mostly of secondhand clothes and shoes, ordinary goods, some grilled food, like street food, but it's also lined with the best restaurants in Surigao City. So you really can walk up and down the tavern, perfectly safe and pleasant. It's open late at night, families, little kids strolling up and down, couples. And there's some nice bars, great restaurants. If you're stuck in Surigao City for the night, I would say go to the Hotel Tavern and walk up and down the boulevard and find a restaurant that looks good to you.
Now, I want to talk just a little bit about prices because you talked about this being overpriced. And by overpriced, we're talking roughly $50. And
Yeah,
when we were on the island and you were talking about the infinity pools and things like that, we were talking roughly the prices there started at about $58. So this is not a high price destination in general.
it's not until you get to Siargao. However,
Got
I felt that, or I said that that hotel in Surigao City is overpriced because of what you get. So, like you
Sure.
mentioned, you get a plunge pool, you get an exotic location on Camiguin, and in Surigao City, you're paying for like a basic room that's equivalent to a chain hotel that you could get anywhere
Right.
else.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
Good point.
yeah. So that's why it always feels frustrating because I know that if I had gotten to Siargao for the same price, I would have gotten like a beautiful room, and I would have been in a place that I want to be in.
Yep. Sure.
The one benefit to that hotel, and it's by far the nicest hotel in the city, is that they have a big, good buffet breakfast. So I would advise buying your ferry ticket to Siargao from Siargao City the night before. You don't want to show up and have to get in line in the morning.
Okay.
It's actually filled with Filipinos and foreign travelers that are hectically trying to make the most convenient the next ferry that goes to the island. But if you bought your ticket the day before, you can show up without too much lead time and casually just make your way in, and you have to go through a lot of lines. It's usually hot. If you're carrying your bags, it can feel stressful if you're buying your ticket beforehand.
Okay.
So from Surigao City, you grab a fast ferry, and I would advise taking the fast, not the slow, because
Okay.
the fast is, I want to say, about an hour and a half. The slow can be 3+ hours. I would even splurge for the first class seat. We're not talking about much money. I was frustrated with myself on this last trip. I think I bought an aircon seat, and I was deciding whether to pay another 50 pesos, which again is the equivalent of about $1 for a first class seat. And I was somehow in the mindset of, no, another dollar? That's crazy. And then when I got to my seat in the aircon section, it was packed. And so it was about 4 or 5 to a side of a row, no elbow room. And I've taken this ferry before, but somehow I forgot that it can get uncomfortable. You do get to see the same kind of B action level film. So it might have been a Steven Seagal, another Van Damme film showing too. And to get to the aircon section of the boat, you walk through the first class section, which are these huge wide seats, and no one was in there. And you would also be the first off the boat. And so I was kicking myself. So my advice would be splurge the extra dollar, pay for the first class seat on the fast ferry.
Okay.
So the fast ferry arrives on the island of Siargao at the port of Dapa. Once you get off the boat, you will be overwhelmed with drivers wanting to take you to your resort. And on Siargao, they have a very specific mode of transportation, although you can find it on some other islands in the Philippines. It's called a hobble hobble. So a hobble hobble is a large motorbike with a platform that you can sit on the back. So generally, you can carry more than one person. You
Okay.
can also get a van, you can get a tricycle, you can get a jeepney. I make eye contact with one person. I go directly to him. I know how much it should cost to get to General Luna, which is the main town where most people stay on Siargao, or to Cloud Nine, which is a little bit further along. And that's the other place where accommodation is concentrated. And Cloud Nine is known for being the prime surf spot in all Siargao. So we'll get back to
Got it.
Cloud Nine and talk about that a little bit more. So when you get off the ferry, make eye contact with one person, go directly to him. You know the price in advance. The price changes, so I would ask around maybe on the ferry or before you arrive. When I was there last, it was around 250, 300 pesos. You get on the back of the motorbike with him, and he takes you right to your accommodation.
Got it.
So General Luna is the main town, and it's very built up now. That's neither a negative nor a positive, depending on what you're looking for. But the dirt road that lines General Luna is now just packed with souvenir stalls, bars, restaurants, cafes, travel agencies. At nighttime, it's a great, lively place to walk up and down the street. It's a lot of fun. It's not the place to stay if you want quiet. If you want quiet, I'd recommend going a little bit further west from General Luna to a place called Malinao. About 10 years ago, there was nothing around Malinao. Now there's some higher end resorts that are being built there. I stayed at one for a couple nights this time around, a place called Anara. Just fantastic, beautiful place. It had little cottages on one side of the road, a beautiful pool right along the beach on the other. You have your own private, they use the word butler. I would just use somebody that is going to answer whatever WhatsApp message that you deliver and is going to respond with whatever you want and need. The other place, if you're looking for a higher end resort that I'd recommend is Siargao Beach Resort. And that is in the heart of General Luna. So you're not losing out on options in terms of walking for a restaurant and cafe at night. It's very stylish, very contemporary. There are rooms, there's also beachfront cottages. And this part of Siargao is also not necessarily known for its wide white sand beaches. And Siargao Island Resort is built on a white sand beach. Not necessarily so wide, but it's quite beautiful. The other place that I recommend staying is in Cloud Nine. And I mentioned how Cloud Nine is world famous for being Philippines' most popular surf break.
Yep.
So in December of 2021, Typhoon Rai, or internationally known as Typhoon Odette, hit Siargao and devastated it with winds up to 168 miles per hour,
Wow.
the equivalent of a Category 5 hurricane. And its first landfall in the Philippines was in Siargao, then it moved further west. Mindanao is generally not in the typhoon belt. The northeast part of Mindanao, where Siargao is on the threshold of that. But this was very unusual. Palm trees throughout the island were uprooted, structures were destroyed. The only things that were left standing really were concrete buildings. And this was a double whammy for the island because in 2021, the island was already suffering from the impacts of COVID.
Right. Sure.
And most of the island's economy is dependent on tourism. So people were already struggling, and people that worked in tourism, that worked at hotels or as surfing guides, didn't have any way to make any kind of income. So a lot of them went back to maybe small scale farming, fishing, having to find some way to get by. And then the hurricane struck. So it really was a challenging time for the island.
The wrongs we must right. The fights we must win. The future we must secure together for our nation. This is what's in front of us. This determines what's next for all of us. We are Marines. We were made for this.
I'd say one thing that makes Siargao unique is because of the close-knit quality of the community there. And it's not only locals and not only Filipinos, but foreigners that have set up businesses there, again, as hotel resort owners, surfing instructors themselves, really all work together to try to help each other get through that difficult time. And there's something unique about Siargao's vibe. So it's got the surfing culture, which you feel everywhere in terms of how people are dressing, to the kind of health food. You can get a lot of acai bowls and granola bowls for breakfast. The people that are surfing there, maybe they're going to go to bed earlier because they're going to want to wake up at 5 a.m., depending on when the break
Okay,
is
sure.
best. But anyway, I mentioned the typhoon because the iconic image of the Cloud Nine surf break was this wooden boardwalk that led up to a two-story pavilion.
Yeah,
And
I've seen.
if you're not a surfer, and I did this myself, when you go there, you just walk to the pavilion and you hang out either on the first or the second floor, and you can spend hours just watching people surf. So that structure was completely destroyed from the typhoon.
Huh.
When it was there recently, they are rebuilding it to be a one-story structure. They're now charging like a minor admission fee. So there's a gate now that you have to pay. I don't remember what it was. Maybe it was $1 to walk out to the break. That wasn't there before. There are some people in the community that are campaigning for the government to do away with that admission fee because they think it impacts the cafes and the restaurants that are set up in Cloud Nine because somebody is not going to choose to eat there if they have to pay a little bit of an extra money. Cloud Nine is an amazing surf break if you're an expert. It's not the best surf break for beginners. I took a lesson there and I'm a beginner, and it's on a reef. So you're bound to get cut up and scratched and come away with a lot of wounds, which I did.
Okay.
So back to surfing. Like I said, it permeates everything about Siargao, the lifestyle, the clothing style, the aesthetics, and to use an overused term, the vibe of the place.
Okay.
The best time to go surfing is from August to November. There's big swells. It's a result of the typhoon winds. From December to April, there's some strong crosswinds. From February to April, it's great for longboarders, riding glassy, waist high. This is how it's described to me. I'm not a longboarder. Buttery, friendly waves. And from May to July, the
Buttery
surf tends
friendly. Okay.
buttery, friendly waves. That's the way it
I
was
don't know
put
what
to
that
me.
means, but all right.
Yeah, I guess smooth, maybe.
I guess
Uh,
so.
yeah, and from May to July is when the surf tends to be lighter and good for beginners. The best place to learn to surf or one of the good places to learn in Siargao is the town or the village of Pacifico.
Okay.
And Pacifico is fairly far north of GL and Cloud Nine. It's on the east coast of Siargao. It's becoming more and more popular because Siargao is a kind of island that people are continually looking for the next place, the next cool spot.
Okay.
And now that GL is overbuilt, Cloud Nine becoming a little bit so, people are building hostels or low key surf spots further and further afield. And so when I started going maybe 20 years ago, there was nothing on Pacifico except a great beach where locals would surf. Now there's a few surf lodges. There's like a taco stand on the beach. There's a couple good restaurants, but it is the best spot for beginners to learn. You can ride a motorbike up there on your own. You can get a van there, and you can turn up, and there'll be lots of locals that are going to approach you, ask you if you want to take a lesson. You can rent a board there. It's very easy to do. There's one restaurant that I recommend eating there. It's a little bit north of the beach where you surf, and it's called Trogan's Perch. And it's part of a resort, but I would suggest just going there to eat. And the restaurant is built at the very top of this cliff with incredible views. There's a pool there. The menu is Mediterranean. The food is good, but it's worth eating there if only for the fantastic views.
Got it.
So the two other experiences that I would say you have to do. One is to ride around the island on a motorbike. Everyone will rent you a motorbike around 500 pesos or so a day. Little insider tip in terms of riding a motorbike anywhere in the Philippines that I didn't know on my first several trips there. That is when you are locking up your bike, parking it somewhere, and you don't want to carry your helmet around. The thing to do is to take the chin strap of the motorbike, run it underneath the seat when the seat is open, and then you close the seat on the strap of
Got it.
the helmet and you lock it, and then nobody can steal your helmet.
Got it.
So rent a motorbike, and I would begin at Cloud Nine, taking in the early morning surf scene, and then driving, making your way to GL, a little bit south and west, and then heading north. And there is a spot now that's basically called Coconut View. And all of these trees that you can see now, basically, as far as you can see, the coconut trees that go on for miles and miles, you can't see anything but coconut trees. The typhoon, however, had wiped most of these out, I think, and they've grown back. Anybody that is riding motorbike, van, taxi, etc., through the island stops there. There are people, lots of people, in fact, these days that will launch drones from there, take Instagram shots. There's even a very clever, particularly Filipino business that opened up at this coconut view spot. So they call themselves human drones. So what they will do is they will take your camera and they will run up to you and then run back, and they will move your camera in an angle over you as if you have a drone.
I love it.
And they have T-shirts that say "Human Drone." They weren't there every day. I know it's popular, but if they're there, it's a clever, fun thing to do. So Just a few kilometers from the view deck is a place called the Maasine Bridge and River Swing. Only in the last 5 or so years has it become now completely overdeveloped, I would say, and over touristed. The last time I was there, even a decade ago, it was really a do it yourself thing. There was one guy that was renting a kayak or a boat that you can take along this very narrow, marshy river.
Okay.
And it was very private and it was serene. Now you pay a small entrance fee. You can jump into the river. You can rent a bamboo raft and paddle up the river. You can jump from a bamboo tower into the river, which a lot of people do. I think there's glass little kayak boats that you can take further along. The road around there is packed with tourists and souvenir stalls. So it's
Okay.
got a little bit of a kitschy feel. We're stopping at least for a look. A little further along, there is a place called the Tayagban Cave Pool. And there you have to get a guide, and it's a fun little scramble through a subterranean cave system that involves a little bit of swimming in an underground cave. You need your bathing suit. On anything you do in Siargao, you should be in your bathing suit. So there's really no reason to never not be
Okay.
in your bathing suit. From there, further north, the next stop is the Go swimming hole. Again, very popular now. The beach there is a really nice white sand beach. There's lots of spots to eat if you're there. But the reason to go there are these crystal clear swimming holes, but it's only visible at low tides. To really get there and see the pools as pools themselves, you have to leave really early in the morning. So you would have to dedicate the drive to skipping these other stops and going directly there. I've
Got it.
never done that because I tend to want to take my time a little bit more. So it's worth stopping though for the nice beach as well. From there, you head further north to Pacifico, where if you want to take a surfing lesson, if you can, if not, it's this great low key beach. I mentioned the Trogan's Perch restaurant. There's some
Right.
other kind of informal shacks you can eat as well. Further north from there, around 10 kilometers north, there's another little pretty little town called Burgos. It's got this beautiful crescent shaped beach, maybe the lightest, bluest waters of anywhere that you could see on the island. It's also another surfing spot. There's some low key cafes that you can stop there. Going further north around the northern tip of the island, then you get to a falls called Tak Tak Falls. You have to park your motorbike, I don't know, a couple hundred meters from the falls themselves. Great for a beautiful waterfall, also great for a refreshing dip. And then from there, you drive a little bit south, you get to a small town called Santa Monica. And Santa Monica has a pier that you can ride your motorbike out. And I like doing this because there's nothing else on this pier. And so there's no traffic. And you could just ride your motorbike as fast as it can down this narrow little spit of concrete, goes really far out. And you have amazing views of the mangroves and all of the surrounding area. Further south from there, you get to the town of Del Carmen. And Del Carmen is an ordinary town, but it's a gateway for highly recommended boat trips to the picturesque Sugba Lagoon. I would recommend doing that, but maybe not on a day long boat tour. It's very easy to do on your own. So if you're in your resort in GL or Cloud Nine, either rent your own motorbike, rent a taxi, go up to Del Carmen, negotiate with the boat person there. I mentioned that Del Carmen is the gateway for these boat trips to Sugba Lagoon, and Sugba Lagoon is a pretty unique place. If you took a drone or if you put a drone up in the air above it, it would look like a watery version of the Chocolate Hills. And the Chocolate Hills are an iconic tourist
Right.
spot in the Philippines. Just mounds and mounds, not mountains, but mounds and mounds of these hills. This lagoon is filled with these beautiful little mountains that are a maze. And you can get a kayak and paddle around there on your own. And it's great fun. If you are only stopping in Del Carmen, then you head further south to Dapa. And Dapa is the main city on Siargao. It's the port city. There's no real reason to stop in Dapa except maybe to fill your motorbike up with gas. The thing that I will mention is that in the Philippines, when you ride around an island, you're more likely to have to fill up your motorbike with gas from just like a general roadside stand. And they sell the petrol in 1 liter Coke bottles.
Okay. Yeah.
It's always a little bit pricier than a gas station, but you're more likely to find those than a gas station because the only gas stations on Siargao that I can think of, there's in Dapa, there's some in Cloud Nine. Other than that, I'm not sure. That's the way Filipinos get their gas. It's from a roadside stand. So from Dapa, then you have the relatively long, by long maybe half hour or so, ride back to the original starting point of GL or Cloud Nine. There's no shortage of day-long boat trips that you can take to surrounding islands from Siargao. Some of them are surf spots, some of them are snorkeling spots, some of them are just known for its beach. The place that's relatively unique that I'd say is worth going if you want to spend a really long day and a good chunk of that day on a boat, and a good chunk of that boat ride could be uncomfortable depending on the weather and the waves. My last trip there, it was a pretty uncomfortable boat ride. But anyway, the place is called Sahotan Cave. Every travel company will sell this, so it's easy enough to book a trip. You get picked up by a van, your accommodation in GL or wherever you are, and they take you to Dapa. So the boats leave from Dapa. This time around, we were on a boat that should have only had 10, but it was packed with 16 people. And two of the other guests were sitting over the engine. And the engine runs really hot, so it's not comfortable. And I noticed the guy next to me started texting somebody else, calling somebody that sounded official. It turns out this man was a high ranking Coast Guard official in the Philippines. And he complained to the Philippine Coast Guard that our boat was overloaded and that we didn't have life jackets. So, because of his involvement, a few of the people were kicked off the boat and put onto another boat, and we were given life jackets. I would just say make sure that your boat is not overloaded. Make sure that you're given life jackets and that nobody has to sit over the engine because it's a 2+ hour boat ride from Dapa to the Sahotan Cave Lagoon area. And this area is a maze of inlets like Sugba in a way that I mentioned before. So it's a maze of inlets off a large island called Bucas Grande. The boat ride back was in really especially foul, terrible weather. So it can get really rough. If you get sick on boats, I would either advise not doing it, taking some Dramamine. If you don't like being on a boat for around 4 to 5 hours in one day, which is a long time, then I would also not recommend doing it. However, once you get to the lagoon itself, then it's all worth it. So they transfer you from these big motorized banca boats that brought you from Dapa to Sahotan, and you're transferred to a large floating platform. And this platform serves as the official park entrance to this area. So then you get transferred into a much smaller, I think it's maybe 3 or 4 people on a very small motorized boat. And you wind your way through this series of just like completely picturesque lagoons, the kind that you see in magazines that are entirely idyllic that you wish you could somehow spend the night at or the rest of your vacation there. One of the highlights that is not to miss is that there's a lagoon called Jellyfish Lagoon, and it is filled with thousands, I don't know, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of a species of non-stinging jellyfish. The lagoon is
Okay.
called Togumon Lagoon, and it's really an amazing experience. I normally don't feel the need to take underwater photographs, but this was one time when I regret not having a camera that could do that. But you just dive in the water with a snorkel, especially going underwater is really unique. And they look reddish in the water. It's hard to swim without not swimming through a whole chunk of them. So the sensation can feel a little bit strange and interesting. The best time to go would be around March to July because that's breeding season. And that's when there's millions of them in this relatively small lagoon.
Huh.
The other thing that you do, there's all these stops along this trip, standardized stops. There is a cave And to get into this underwater cave, you have to swim underwater for about 5 seconds or so to then enter the cave. And there were a few people on our boat, I would actually say myself included, that were a little bit anxious about doing that. The guides helped some people and swam with them or pushed their heads underwater and then swam with them so that they could make it into the cave. Once you're in the cave, it's worth it. It's quite a beautiful spot. And then to exit the cave, you climb up a system of sort of natural stairs using a rope. And then when you get to the top, you have to jump back into the water. I think it's maybe like a 5 meter platform. So it's an interesting route there. The end of the day, and there's a few other beautiful stops where you can swim, but the end of the day is at I'll use the word resort, although that's not exactly what it is, but it's a lunch spot and they serve every group a boodle fight lunch, and that's spelled Bodle, a boodle fight lunch. Basically, this means oodles and oodles of food. It doesn't. They didn't name it boodle to rhyme with oodle, but it does. And the food is shaped into spell the word Sahotan. There's chicken, pork adobo, fruit, rice, veggies, fish, shrimp, and it's all laid out on banana leaves. And boodle fight, that method of serving food originated, I think, in the Philippine military. It was essentially an easy way to serve a lot of people at once. But it's a really fun way to eat. And this resort has its own series of diving boards and rope swings. And so once you're done eating, you can jump back into the water.
Got it. And I think we're wrapping up your 1 week
Yeah.
itinerary. And for time, this is going into longest episode territory. I know that there are other places you would have loved to add on to this. If we just want people to name a couple of places that people could do more research on, if you had a couple more days, what would you add on?
I would say Zamboanga City for its unique cuisine. To get to Zamboanga City, though, you have to fly from Manila or Cebu, arrive in Zamboanga City, and then I would say then you fly back to Davao or you fly to Davao, and then you can go from Davao to northern Mindanao. The other place that we left off was Davao. Essentially, we left that off.
Right.
There are islands near Davao. There's pretty good diving. There is hiking, there's trekking, there's Mount Apo, which I mentioned is the highest peak in the Philippines. There's a large island just offshore Davao called Samal Island, and that's where Davaeños spend weekends. There's, I don't know, hundreds of
Okay.
kilometers, dozens of kilometers of beachfront there.
Excellent. As we get to some of our wrap up questions, you're standing in the prettiest spot in all of Mindanao. Where are you standing? What are you looking at?
The prettiest spot for me is relatively difficult to get to, fairly out of the way. It's a place called the Agong House, and it's this sculptural garden built on a beautiful hillside at the foothills of Mount Apo. The closest town is called Kapatagan, and you can see Mount Apo easily in the distance, although the peak of Mount Apo is often covered in clouds. And this property was built by a Mindanao based artist named Kublai Milan. He's actually Davao based as well. And Kublai has enormous sculptures that are actually built all over Mindanao. I'd say most every major city has some. And they generally involve large figures that are representative of the complexity of Mindanao culture. So there's usually someone that's Muslim, someone that's Christian, someone that's indigenous. There's people that are playing traditional instruments. And the Agung House property is basically a hillside park that's covered in Kublai sculptures. And he has made this property open to the public and just encourages people to turn up and to meditate, even to sleep or camp over, to appreciate taking the views, just as a serene place. And it is south of Davao. Really, to get there in any kind of convenient or logical way, you're probably going to have to rent a car, maybe a motorbike as well.
Okay. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Mindanao.
I can say something that makes me laugh, certainly only in the Philippines, and it maybe happens to me more in Mindanao than it does elsewhere, which is
Okay.
when you go to a Philippine restaurant, or let's say a restaurant in the Mindanao, the menu, I think of it as a platonic ideal of what the restaurant would hope to serve. So you always have to go into a place with a plan A, B, and C, maybe even a D for what you would want to eat.
Okay.
So often you ask for something, they don't have it. You ask for the next thing, they don't have it. At that point, I usually will say, "Can you tell me what you do have?"
And then if you had to summarize Mindanao in just 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
I should have known this question because I heard it on your other
Yep, I
podcast.
ask it every time.
So let me think for a second. Thrilling, stunning, eye-opening.
Excellent. Going with the hyphenated words, always a good pro move there because you get more. Excellent. Our guest again has been Michael Grosberg, and we mentioned at the beginning that Michael, that your website is like local.io. That is obviously not your work as a guidebook writer, but what is like local.io?
It's a travel platform that matches culturally curious travelers with like-minded hosts for meals, activities like fishing, for example, and celebratory events like weddings. Right now, we are in Cambodia, Vietnam, and Armenia, soon to expand all over, hopefully next to the Philippines, for example, to Namibia, Tanzania, Nepal, and hopefully more from there. It operates like a platform. So if you're traveling in any of these countries, you can look onto our platform and see what experiences are offered
Okay.
and book directly with us. And it's a chance really to, we think, get to know ordinary people, their culture, and the way that they live in ways that the tourism industry mediates your experience. And this way is to get at things directly.
Excellent. Now, you mentioned one word there that took me by surprise, which was weddings. So I can potentially get myself invited to an Armenian wedding or something like that, or some other cultural event that I
Yeah,
would not normally get an invitation.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah. In Cambodia and Vietnam, for example, where the weddings are typically village size, so there's hundreds of
got it.
people
Okay,
without
got
a
it.
formal invitation. So we will source out weddings and we'll put them up on the platform. And then for a fee that goes, most of it goes to the wedding party, you can
Okay,
experience a local traditional wedding.
huh? Fascinating. Excellent. Yeah, and that website again is likelocal.io, and check that out. And Michael, thanks so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for the Philippines and then for Mindanao.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, as always, to the patrons of the show who help support Amateur Traveler financially. Had a great time hanging out with patrons this morning at the monthly Patreon Zoom call. If you're interested in learning what you can get as a patron, go to patreon.com/amateur traveler. I'm going to skip some of the other feedback because this show has gone kind of long, although I thought it was wonderful, so I was glad that it did. But one piece of news that you should know is that the Amateur Traveler 2025 trip will be to Cuba, and it will be in February of 2025. I'm still pricing the trip, and then patrons will get the first shot at it, and then people in the Amateur Traveler Facebook group, amateurtraveler.com/trips, will get the second shot at it, and if there are still slots open, we'll announce it in the show and in the newsletter. But last year, I know it filled up before we got to that point, so just be aware. And with that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more.